Good day to you. This is Anagalactic bringing you another special presentation on this Thursday, May 16th, 2024 from Chico, California. The main topic that I've been dealing with for 3 years has of course been geometry, which is a branch of abstract science. It's basic science from which science is derived. The nature of mathematics is very, very interesting. I think anybody would have to admit that the function of numbers in the human equation, which here reaches out to all of society, is one of an abstraction which is so useful that it's now been deified. That numbers take the place of another part of the human projective consciousness. We are communal beings and we affect each other by our behavior. The situation in the world is such that we can find two clear divisions among all humans, which absolutely identifies us as being part of one group or the other. And there are many ways of creating this dichotomy, a word that I taught you in a previous lecture. I hope you're aware of the meaning of the word dichotomy. It's extremely important to have this kind of basic perspective as a rational modern man because of the nature of the psychotic split which identifies the human race. The human race is a psychotic adventure. Humans do not know anything worthy of their station in life. It's remarkable that after 5,000 years of history, that mankind has made no progress whatsoever toward his actual goal. It's gotten to the extreme situation that men no longer recognize that they have a role. And so human beings are merely obsessive, psychotic cattle currently swarming the earth to destroy it. A very, very difficult situation for a rational man to face. Of course, rational men are in extremely short supply right now, and I do feel privileged because it's a matter of a combination of blueprinting and just sheer chance and luck that a human can reach the station that I've reached far beyond the reach of this world's troubles. That makes me a target because the nature of the herd instinct is to reduce everything to its level, which is so low that there really is no need to invent hell. This is hell. We're in hell. It couldn't be worse. Now, whenever one says that, one has to recognize, if one is I, that of course it could be worse. And really, as Henry Miller pointed out, that is the driving force that keeps the billions of human beings on Earth from immediately committing suicide to end this charade. Every human being has the choice, on awaking each day, to slit their fucking throat and simply end this monstrous charade. Because the perception is, there is no afterlife, there is no creator, there is no design, there's no reason for things. We come and go like sparks, and it will soon be over, and then the universe will forget all about the human experiment. But the question that always arises, if one can somehow, by luck and perhaps industry, really privilege, just luck, just sheer goddamned luck, that you're able to reach a situation in your own life where you're capable of sifting the truth from the delusion. I do not see anyone around me engaged in that critical transition from sheer monstrous stupidity, ignorance, and hopelessness to one of some kind of human station, which obviously involves our rational, logical, onboard system. It's quite difficult to deal with the common denominator of daily life when you get out of your house and go anywhere. You see homeless people, crippled people, people who are indigent, just out of luck. There's nothing left for them except the gutter and raving. The calamities that sweep the earth all the time, constantly, of disease and war and everything that's involved with war, which is sheer horror, cannot be solved by anyone anymore. And so it looks as though we're stymied. The real nature of the desperate situation, the absolute rock bottom line of hopelessness, is that the men who are endowed with intelligence and privilege, many of whom are now in the United States, are simply deviated from their proper course by the forces of propaganda, indoctrination, and subjugation of their mind. The men out on the internet now, I'll just name a couple: Piers Morgan, Kurt J. Mongol, Lex Friedman, men like this, interviewers, professional interviewers, are engaged in a process of venting, which is a feminine trait. Venting is something that women do among themselves in order to protect themselves from the emotional injustice of the male part of the society, which still to this day is steeped in ignorant chauvinism based on the Bible teachings of ignorant men who misinterpret everything for their own political gains in order to get money to survive. There is a predatory system that's installed not just in the United States. We inherited all of this from the common cesspool of humanity. And so it is an interesting diversion to study science. It should be the main occupation of a rational man. I have made it my main occupation in the second half of my life, to give it a very I'm dying. Most men of my age are in the process of dying. But the word is dichotomy, that we have two sides. And nobody ever talks about this. It's the most important subject that could be brought up today, and nobody talks about it. That is simply a mild indicate of the total psychosis. There seems to be no way out. You have men who are formally promoted by the common denominator of society. They're formally promoted to positions of authority. And Richard Dawkins has usurped one of these stations so that he's become the spokesman for Satan. Now, Satan, of course, is a controversial topic. My purpose today in addressing you at all, which I do consider to be a hopeless operation, but I am under orders to attempt to do this, is to educate anyone willing to listen what is still available to get out of this trap. The main problem that I face, besides the obvious objective hurdles, such as getting an audience at all, is that my message simply cannot be understood because there's a tape that's been implanted in all of my peers, which prevents them from taking rationality seriously. We're all oppressed with the Woody Allen dilemma that pretty soon, within a few decades for most people that I'm speaking to, if you're going to be dead and consigned to oblivion. Now, when Richard Dawkins addresses this obvious question of futility, he basically addresses it with a diversion, with no rationality behind it. It's just simply a segue, a red herring, where he claims, both implicitly, mostly this is subterfuge, so it's a psychological attack. He's a predator. He wants to imbue people with the comfort that they desire for their futile situation. In America, as I say, which is dominated by the feminine side, the way to address real problems is by denying them. And to the degree that they cannot be denied, it's a matter of reordering one's priorities totally artificially so as to have an escape hatch against the crushing notion of futility. The way Richard Dawkins executes this attack is to very mellifluously, very eloquently, in his beautiful British accent and his great sense of composure, which he's trained himself to maintain when he's attacked, he attempts to convince people by every possible method that there is no problem, and then he offers no solution. In other words, total denial. No answer. In other words, that's the answer. There is no answer. This is contrary to the blueprint given to human beings, such that men, this only pertains to men, that men would organize themselves in such a way as to promote intelligence and promote intelligent men to positions of authority where they can have a beneficial influence on all of society. Instead, the most dangerous, malignant, stupid men, they're not really stupid, they're intelligent, but they're diabolically intelligent. They've decided in their own minds that the correct way to address the universe is as the enemy of man, that mechanically produces humans for its own amusement or whatever, until we go the way of, and then you have to really indulge in Eastern mysticism, which is the reason why it's becoming popular in the West, is that it offers a false sense of futurity, that once you're snuffed out, you'll either be reincarnated or some other unidentified consciousness, continuation of your consciousness, which is the whole goal. And the whole mechanism devised by the Easterns, who are often called the Orientals, but really the people of India are not particularly Oriental, but anything east of the Indus River, China, and Japan come to mind, were cut off from Western civilization, where a ray of hope did arise. Going back to the beginning of human history, there was a solution for the earth which was planned from the beginning, of course, and is outlined in the Holy Scriptures that were finally given to the Jewish people who had been selected by God for this purpose, to maintain the continuity of the plan of heaven on earth. This does involve rationality, of course, but the nature of the problem we face as ordinary humans is not particularly rational because it's a matter of life and death, which is not a rational proposition. Currently, anybody listening to me is alive, a rather basic fact, but it's so basic that it simply cannot be faced rationally because of the prospect of death. The message that I would like to give today is that there is a plan that is still in operation. The Holy Scriptures were eventually wrested out of the hands of the Jews, who had become the enemies of God and of mankind. The Jews then languished for about 2,000 years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the dispersion of the evil nation to the four corners of the earth, and the Jews ended up as far as China, and then they of course came to the New World. But meanwhile, in the cesspool of Europe, where the Jews were continually under persecution, being brutalized in the most inhuman fashion because, according to the superstitious European troglodytes, the Jews had murdered God. So the Jews developed a very bad name according to the curse of Moses. And it was part of the plan of God. God foresaw all of this, the Creator. This is a topic that Richard Dawkins simply wishes to destroy. But I'm here to make sure that none of this information is completely lost on modern society, because it is really the only hope. Now, the problem that the typical modern American, I am in America and I am an American, although I don't like that name because of the association it has. I'm an American in the sense that I was born and raised in America. And I am a product of the land, so I am a Native American, just exactly as Native American as the so-called Indians. Another subject which is so tragic and so brutal that it's beyond description. There are millions of examples of this brutality. It's continuous. It's unceasing oppression that's passed on from generation to generation, very often in the form of racism and racist supremacy, which gives men some kind of ephemeral goal that the white people will finally dominate the earth, or in the case of Zionism, that the Jews will finally dominate the earth. Now, as I said in the prior presentation, the role of the Jews on earth is central. When God chooses a people, He does not abandon them. But He is a vengeful God, and He does have emotions. That's obvious. We would not be able to identify our own emotions if it were not for the emotions of the Creator, fully expressed in Genesis 8 and 9. Also, the famous line, which is often quoted sometimes on banners at football games in America, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe on Him should not perish, but have eternal life. The problem with saying that is that the people who are saying it don't believe it. They don't believe it because they don't understand it. They say it because they're venting. They're trying to defend themselves and their families against the oppression and predatory instinct of the cannibals around them. So it is a natural process to seek some sort of defense against the oppression of the world, which again is continuous, malignant, and irremediable. So we're involved in a terrifying paradox as we face the prospect of eternal oblivion. Richard Dawkins has addressed this under questioning, as has Larry King, the famous interviewer, when he had on Norm Macdonald, a very famous and excellent comedian. Larry King was attempting to probe, for the sake of his paying audience, the Christianity that Norm Macdonald expresses, extremely rare among comedians who were reared up by the processes of natural selection among humans, to become entertainers, to take our minds off of oblivion. So comedy does serve a very important human function, which of course, like everything else, is abused. But Norm Macdonald is an exception. Norm Macdonald is a very, very good comedian who indulges in the usual scurrilous jokes that entertain the audience most. He's provocative. But in the course of the interview between Larry King and Norm Macdonald, because of the respect, the level of respect which was quickly established between the two men during the interview, it became obvious that Larry King is favorably disposed toward Norm Macdonald. But of course, for the sake of his listening audience, he's trying to get something exciting out of Norm Macdonald. And according to his role as Larry King, the interviewer, the main part of his job on behalf of the ignorant and foolish American public is to get at Norm Macdonald's Christianity in order to level it, in order to negate it, in order to pillory and satire anything having to do with the plan of God. Now Larry, I believe, is an even-handed man, and I believe he's deceased now, so this is a man who's no longer with us, I believe. But in either case, he's not on the public scene anymore. But this was by far his most important interview, because in the course of the interview, the roles were switched, and Larry went along with it most willingly, where Norm Macdonald, being a very, very balanced man, did not respond defensively against the obvious probes of Larry King in order to sarcastically denounce the stupidity and superstition of Christianity. But instead of dodging or somehow coming up with an artifice to deal with Larry King's programmed approach, Norm very congenially and naturally turned the question around to Larry. This is an extremely valuable technique. That when someone is after you and they've recognized that you have some kind of superiority complex, that's how it's interpreted, that you think that you know God or you're going to heaven or you have some kind of answer, well, this instantly must be attacked and leveled and reduced to the common denominator of retardedness that infects American society. Instead of succumbing to that, Norm took it seriously, but in order to answer Larry's question, he turned it around and asked Larry a very reasonable question. What do you think about your own death? This turned into the most amazing exchange that I've ever heard in any interview program. Larry, of course, was taken aback somewhat by this question because it's taboo. But since the cat was out of the bag and it was obvious that Larry was after Norm's religion, to crucify it once again is the instinct of a human idiot, Norm turned it around and asked Larry King what he thought about the problem that humanity faces. What is your attitude, Larry, towards your own death? And Mr. King answered, I think, extraordinarily well. He said that it wasn't death itself that affected him, but rather the concept of oblivion. And when Richard Dawkins was asked this question by another interviewer later, not too long ago, Dr. Dawkins responded, not quite as well. Larry was honest, but Richard's role, as he sees it, is certainly not to be honest. It's to be a completely believable deceiver. And so the way that Richard Dawkins answered the question put to him, where he was in the role of Norm Macdonald, and the interviewer was probing at Richard's atheism to support it, to promote it, to give Richard a chance to tell the American, or really the whole listening audience, why hopelessness is the only choice. And Richard is an expert in this area. He's devoted his whole life to destroying the hope of humans. Why he would do this is very obvious. He's very well dressed, he has a nice home, he's famous, he's well liked. And so his job is done, he's been successful. But the way he answered the question put to him was similar to Larry King's answer. He said that speaking on behalf of others, Richard didn't really include himself, since he's above all of us as the butt boy of Satan. And his reply was that human beings fear the infinity of oblivion. That's essentially the same answer that Larry gave. It's the concept of a continuity of oblivion, that this is simply unacceptable to the human psyche. Now, Larry did not offer any solution. He didn't see any. He's a confirmed atheist. But there's a big difference between one kind of atheist and another. One is passive. They've been programmed to be atheists because that helps a person fit into their atheist society. Now, on the other side of the fence, you have what is considered to be Christianity. And this is what I wanted to address. Because in the last presentation, I made the extraordinary statement that there's no such thing as Christianity. One must say that there are such people as Christians. Norm Macdonald claims to be a Christian, and I fully believe that he was a Christian. I see no reason to doubt him. I am a Christian. But the problem with identifying yourself as a Christian is this pigeonholes you in the eyes of others as a superstitious, stupid, maniacal fool who's been fed on myths all his life and now is totally deluded, and that person is treated as a cripple, that person is treated as a retard, that person is treated as a nigger. In America, retards and niggers are the predominant perception of people to people, is how stupid are you? And the reason for that is it's entertaining. Christians are very, very useful in American society by the systematic promotion of a certain frame of mind, where Christianity has a new definition unknown to the ancients. This is the reason why I said that there's no such thing as Christianity. That's a loaded statement. It's a statement that identifies the split in the human consciousness, where a word has two meanings depending on whether you believe in the premise or not. So Christianity, to a rational man such as myself, has a very specific, logically composable meaning that has value of whatever sort, but it's a valuable perception, that of believing in the role and nature of Christ. However, that definition of Christianity is unacceptable because it seems as though there's some truth to it. But if there were such a truth attached to Christianity, it's threatening, viscerally threatening, according to the tapes that are systematically implanted in certainly the American mind, whereby Christianity is considered to be the enemy of American society, and that makes the Christian communities throughout the United States the target of lampoon and hatred. There is enormous justification for this point of view, because Christianity has gotten an extraordinarily bad name. The reason for that is that in the historical development of Christianity, it was first adopted as a state religion in Constantinople during the rise of the Roman Catholic Church. And that was a state religion, just as Anglicanism is the state religion of England. It is important for a rational man to discern that any organized society of men that persists long enough, even in a correct apprehension of reality, such that it starts out well, it has a logical position to promote. When that becomes the property of the state, it evolves by itself and distorts the meaning of the original message. Now, in the case of Christianity, it is written in the New Testament scripture that followers of Yeshua were first called Christians in Antioch, which is in present-day Syria. So the term was used at an early stage to identify the followers of Christ. The way these men typically ended up was that they were murdered by the Jews who had been dispersed but still had power in their own communities. And one of the apostles of Christ was captured twice by these malignant Jews and tortured. And they tried to kill him, but they didn't really care too much about killing him. They just wanted to reduce him to insignificance by whipping him 39 times with a lash, which if I described it to you, you'd vomit. The way that the Jews would lash people is, even among the typical malignancies of man in his treatment of other man, is one of the most notoriously devilish forms of torture ever devised by man. And Paul was subjected to this treatment twice. Most men die under the lash. The Jews give 39 lashes to a person that they hate in the name of their god, which is Satan. They give these lashes to a man to the number of 39 because they consider it to be inhumane to complete the 40th. But most men die well before the 39th lash. Those who do not die lose their minds and are raving lunatics thereafter. This is the typical result of a lashing, which Paul the Apostle endured twice. So that was the beginning of Christianity, a form of persecution the Jews have never known, not even in the concentration camps of Germany, Poland, and Ukraine, and I believe other places as well in their temporary 2-year empire. But the Jews are certainly not unacquainted with malignant treatment at the hands of others. What they forget is that they're worse. So the Jewish nation as such has never ceased to be the enemy of God. They're the enemy of God because God told them that he would make them his enemy if they murdered his son, which they did. The cruelest form of punishment of all is crucifixion, because of the humiliation the man endures on that cross, with, don't forget, a jeering crowd at his feet, taunting him. So the man is naked when he's pinned up to the cross, which, according to some researchers, was not always a cross due to the lack of wood, since hundreds of thousands of these crosses had to be erected like telephone poles in order to nail up human beings. So the nature of crucifixion was a Roman invention. It was not invented by the Jews, but of course the Jews recognized that to give Yeshua over to the Romans would solve their problem, which was to somehow maintain their Zionist goal. That's always been the goal of the Jews as a collective society. That is extended to modern times as the Jews invaded America along with all other immigrants, but they maintained their contact with Europe. In Europe, the Jews invented communism, and then they took over Russia. The results of that are incredibly far-reaching. After the establishment of the communist empire, with the complicity of our own magnificent leader, Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt met with Joseph Stalin, the incarnation of Satan on earth at that time, and they decided it's time to resurrect the Zionist nation. This is absolute fact. It is, of course, under lock and key, since if Americans knew that, they would not be able to go along with the plan. But American society was infected with this Zionist sentiment, whereby, when it came time for the Russian Revolution, the Zionists were in full swing in Europe. It's a matter of debate even among the most informed observers, of whom I consider myself one, but even this is a little bit beyond my reach. But experts who know more of this formation of the Zionist society, which never died out. The Jews kept it alive in their shtetls throughout Ukraine and Russia and wherever else they were dispersed. There were always some Zionists. So they kept the flame alive, their hatred of God, in order to get back at God somehow. This, of course, is the plan of Satan. So the Jews became the representatives of Satan on earth. And they've gotten a bad name ever since. They're hated by all men. Jews are absolutely despised instinctively by all men. Because everybody knows, who knows anything about the Jews at all, is that they were the nation of God, and God rejected them and now hates them. So it's a natural sentiment of a good man, a righteous man, to hate the Jews. However, there is a warning given to all Christians, and this is the subject I'm leading up to. What is a Christian? A Christian is not someone who hates Jews. The reason is that God has not given up on human beings, and Jews, despite what anyone says, are human beings. They are. They're just like you and I. Okay? So that's a fact. It's a scientific fact, so it cannot be denied. So Jews are just as the same, they're potential Christians, and some of them are Christians. Now, that has a drawback, because of course Christianity morphed along with Jewish society. It morphed in response to its desperate situation as being the filth of the earth for having murdered God's Son. They're held responsible for that as a nation, but they're not held responsible for that as individual human beings, because a human being does not need to go along with their so-called race. There are two races of men on earth, the Jews and everybody else. This is how God set it up. And the Jews were meant to be the leaders of the earth. It's obvious that they're more intelligent than most people. Albert Einstein was a Jew, and you could name a list of thousands of others. Extraordinarily intelligent men, potentially of enormous benefit to humanity. Now, Christianity, however, had changed, and collectively, among the so-called whites of Europe who developed Christianity into the religion of every empire, in Europe, Christianity featured strongly. And there came about a schism, largely due to the effort of Martin Luther, who pointed out that the very nature of the Catholic Church was completely devoted to lucre, that they did not serve God, they served their own pocketbook. And they're brutal, ruthless men, in many ways comparable to the Jews, although that's a very harsh analysis of what would come to be called a typical Christian, that a typical Christian is a bloodthirsty, greedy monster with delusions of grandeur based on some special appointment by God to be the spokesman for Christ on earth. I have never met a real Christian in my life except for an extremely few men and women. The rest are simply American swine. So their representation of Christianity here in America, the Protestants, their representation of Christianity is totally false, because they believe, that is, the Protestant churches of America, which basically defined our nation until very recently, completely deluded, brainwashed societal human beings with no real perception of God or Jesus. Instead, what all Protestant churches are based on, what their guiding principle is go forth into all the nations and make converts of all. That, I believe, is not actually part of the Bible. There's only one place in the Bible, that is the New Testament, where that statement occurs. And it's at the end of one of the gospel stories, one of the 4 versions of the mission of Christ. And it's appended right at the end. I believe that was added by another hand. It may have been a well-meaning hand, but it has distorted the role of Christianity on earth. The goal of Christianity is not to make converts of all nations, because to make converts involves a certain amount of pressure, and there is no pressure involved in true religion. Most religion is false for this very reason, because the nature of religion, when it's correctly defined, is based on a change of mind. That is the word that is used in Greek, metanoia, to change your mind. And what that means is that you have an orientation in your life that now changes. It changes completely to a different orientation. This can be wrenching. And to coerce people who are considered to be inferior, and this was carried on in Europe by missionaries, to try to promote Christianity under that guise is to give a false impression of Christianity. Now, in the promulgation of the so-called gospel throughout the world by Christian missionaries, the entire goal was to convert them to European society so they would be presentable among moral men. Whereas these relatively primitive tribes, those that had not been totally exposed to European culture, they were vastly impressed by the missionaries in every way. Missionaries can give the impression of being very moral people and helpful people, and in fact, many of them were, to the point of giving their lives for what they considered to be the name and message of Christ. And this impressed the natives, because only the very finest Christians were sent out as missionaries. Finest being they would be willing to give this impression that they were not being led into a trap, but in fact, it was an arm of imperialism, and that can be fully established in retrospect. So Christianity, the way it arose in Europe, was a malignant and brutal system of the rising nations of Europe in order to give themselves some form of identity so they could take over the lands and possessions of their neighbors. Now in America, there was really nothing to conquer, except of course the local indigenous population, which was very quickly wiped out. But the nature of the invasion was mostly from the Spanish, who got here first. The Spanish and Portuguese got here, and because of the diseases that had been fostered in the cesspools of Europe over a period of centuries, the white people who came to the New World were infected with dozens of hideous diseases to which they had become relatively immune, and so they were carriers of such vicious diseases that the effect it had on the defenseless population of North and South America reduced the population by 90% in the short space of about a century. So that by the time the white Europeans, that is of Northern Europe, from the Netherlands and England and other countries, Italy, Germany, and France, of course, when they came here to finally establish a new nation, which was inevitable, when that finally happened and the United States was formed, by then the war was over. When you've destroyed 90% of the population of two continents, there's not much left. When you lose 9 out of 10 of your community, you're essentially defenseless. And so what was left of the nations of America, the tribal nations of North America, is what I am most familiar with. It was easy pickings to simply round them up, herd them up, torture and kill them, which was none. And so the Indians now live on reservations as second-class citizens. Mostly they're alcoholics, and they are still the same tribal people they were, but now part of a totally foreign occupying power. And so under international law, the United States is completely a war criminal. This is totally denied, of course, in order to promote manifest destiny, which is racial supremacy of the whites. Because the Jews of Europe turned white, they had been brown when God destroyed their nation, but when they went north, over a period of centuries, they turned white. Science is not fully able to explain this evolutionary process of natural selection from the phenotypical dominant recessive gene pool of humanity. Genetic change at the genotype level does not occur. That's been proved, so there's no such thing as natural selection in Darwinian formulation, but there is such a thing as natural selection from the gene pool, which does not change the genome. So there's no such thing as biological evolution in the Darwinian sense, and that leads to a quandary. So that had to be denied. And so Darwin was accepted as part of the brutal occupying power. When Darwin finally formulated his theory, it was quickly decided that that's the answer to the problem of human origin, that essentially we're descended from the common gene pool of the ecology, which is an oxymoron. There is no common gene pool of the ecology. All the species are separate and they've not changed at all, except according to their own phenotypical diversification system, which is genetically locked at the genome level, but can be altered through a process of selection of phenotypical hereditary traits such as skin color, eye color, hair color, and some other physiognomical traits. But the ascendancy of this lie was finally overturned in the 50s, 60s, and 70s of the 20th century with the discovery of DNA. So that was suppressed and was turned into propaganda, a total lie, that natural selection had actually been proved by the discovery of DNA when the exact opposite is true. So Christianity has become identified with every form of lie and deception. Truly so. So that's why I say there's no such thing as Christianity. Because when an American hears the word Christian, he knows that that's a superstitious imbecile. That is generally true. And so there's a stability that exists in American society based on a complete fantasy. So all of this is to say, in short, that we inherited all the problems and sins of the past with no progress being made. So the actual evolution of the human race has been halted. And currently the population, the white population, particularly in America, but definitely England and most of Europe, most of it is based on denial, lies, deception, foolishness, brutality, and of course, racial supremacy. Now the Jews capitalized on this in the rise of Zionism. First of all, they faked an American revolution by promulgating Marxist communism, a Jewish idea. Karl Marx was a Zionist Jew, so was Engels. They're both Zionist Jews, the enemies of mankind by their own admission, and certainly, according to God's instructions to the rest of us, about how to regard these monsters. So in the process of dealing with the rise of Zionism, a man named Adolf Hitler was immersed in the Marxist scene in basically what is today Eastern Europe. Essentially, Hitler was in Vienna studying art, of all things, when he was exposed to Marxism, and he became immersed in that since he was politically oriented, rather obviously now in retrospect, and he identified the Jewish threat. Now, as is typical in a political leader representing his nation, Hitler took this to an extraordinary extreme, that he decided that the best way to handle the Jewish threat was to kill all the Jews. That is exactly what the Zionists wanted him to do. This could only be under the control of a supernatural power, identified in Holy Scripture as Satan, a rebellious angel in the employ of the Creator. So you have a defector in heaven, and that is the actual. No matter how shocking that may be, no matter how much that may cause you to hate the messenger, which would be myself, nevertheless, my commission is not to make converts of all the world by a lying idea of Christianity. It is to induce men to turn to their Creator in order to get the only solution available for this malicious situation. The Jews invented Nazism and they invented communism. And the reason they did that was in order to coordinate the efforts needed for the Zionist monsters to reestablish their base on Earth so they can complete their mission to take over the world. This is the ultimate conspiracy, and you have to recognize that it is the invention of God. He invented this conspiracy. What is unknown, relatively speaking, is that God is completing his plan exactly according to schedule. The nature of injustice on earth is such that anyone who believes that their consciousness is simply erased after death, which is Richard Dawkins's satanic message, anyone who claims that claims that Hitler got away with his murders. It wasn't just 6 million Jews. It was tens of millions of innocent human beings because of racial supremacy, which was instilled in the German nation by the Jews in order to make them a malignant nation. They had previously turned to Russia as their prime target. The Zionists absolutely despised Russia for reasons I cannot go into, mostly because you wouldn't believe it and it would confuse you. But the Zionists took over Russia and then instigated the most ferocious reign of terrorism and mass murder ever witnessed on the face of the earth. However, the Zionists who are responsible for all of these hundreds of millions of murders are now in power at the center of the older earth in Jerusalem. They are the undisputed masters of the Middle East now. They are not done. They are now inducing their Zionist empire. The Jews own America. They control all the money, and that's all they're interested in America is money. It's American money that financed the communist revolution, just as the Nazi Empire was fostered by, for instance, American Standard Oil fueled the Luftwaffe during the war. So America was on the side of the Nazis, but only in order to persecute the Jewish population of Europe, to induce them to return to their homeland, which the Zionists to this day believe belongs to them, in defiance of what the Jews were told in their own scripture by God through their prophets, including Moses, that in the latter days God is going to hate you and he's going to wipe you out at the end. That is exactly what's going to happen. But then when you read what leads up to the final extirpation of this malignancy of earth, the Zionists, it involves an apocalypse. So that's my message to you. Your situation is hopeless. America is already destroyed, the Jews have already taken over, and the entire population of the earth is doomed unless God intervenes. But when he does, it's going to be terrifying. So be ready for that, and I hope you're willing to turn to your Creator for his solution, which I won't repeat to you. Only you can decide what that is. But as a rational man, it's your only choice. You need mercy, you need protection, and there's only one. And if you don't believe in it, as Richard Dawkins is teaching you not to believe in your only hope, then you're doomed. And this is Anagalactic, bringing you the secret of the universe concerning the fate of the earth. It's going to be destroyed by fire. Everyone is going to be destroyed. And then will come the judgment. That's necessary in order to correct the evils which were perpetrated on innocent people throughout history, beginning with the murder of Cain. But it began before that, in the Garden of Eden, when Satan crept in and infected the mind of Adam with a foul lie. So, if you want to read the Bible, don't go into any church. Read it on your own. Read it the way it is, and try to clear your mind of propaganda. And then you'll find the answer. It may take you a long time. It shouldn't, though. It should be clear at once what the problem is. I've tried to make it clear to you what your only hope is. To continue your consciousness according to what you know is correct, so that you don't experience the morbid fear of Larry King, who died without hope and without faith, and to avoid the lies, the systematic lies of men like Richard Dawkins, who are here to destroy you, in order that the Jews can take over the earth and enslave it, in which case it would be thousands of years of total agony, except for the rich, fat Jews. So all the things you heard about anti-Semitism, do not apply it to individual human beings, Jewish or otherwise. Do not blame a human, because they're still subject to repentance. You don't want to persecute human beings, ever. So don't do what they do, but be against what they're for. That's the role of a rational man on earth. You could be killed for it, but your alternative is enslavement. So, I hope you understand that I'm a rational, moral man who's seeking to disseminate information to assist you in making critical decisions in your life. This is the role of a true scientist. I insist that this goes well beyond being a true scientist, even according to my own definition, which differs enormously from the common definition. It's the role of a wise man, and that's what men are blueprinted to become, wise. I've only met, besides myself, whom I include among the wise men, because of my insight and my disposition to execute the true plan of God. I think you understand that you're not going to find any help. You're on your own. I'm here to help, and I'm going to do whatever I can to give you the options you need so you can make rational decisions to save your life. Otherwise, you're going to die, and then you're going to be judged, and nobody knows the outcome of that. Only God knows. So be humble, be aware, be cautious. Do this for yourself. Don't try to influence others with it. Nobody can save another man. I'm simply doing my best to give you the ability to do what only you can do, to turn to your Creator, the one who gave you life. Okay? Pretty simple, I think. I hope you accept this in the spirit in which it's given. I am not a hateful man, and I don't really hate anybody. Certainly not the Jews. I, at one time, thought I was a Jew. In a way, I still do, but not a Zionist. Okay? All right, this is Anagalactic. We'll be right back with you with some science. Not soon, not within the next few days, but in June we're going to pick up the pace to get the secrets of the universe out of quantum mechanics and cosmology so that you understand your origins and your destiny according to rational logic, which cannot be denied. We'll be back with you. Keep looking up.